Well, I'm very happy for the opportunity of being here today. I'm encouraged. That will only be significant to you if you listen to the rest of the message, because ultimately I'm going to speak to you from Psalm 77 and just ask the question, are you a little discouraged? I'm encouraged. I don't know if you are able to remember where you were on September 20th, that's the day today, September 20th, 50 years ago. I'm looking around and I see some of you, and I would say you weren't born. Probably the only person older than I am here is Dave Bauer. Do you know where I was 50 years ago today, September 20th? I was preaching at Bayfair Baptist Church. Not in this building, not in this location. The old location, and if you want to drive by that, you'll find that going across the 401, going down West Shore Boulevard, in the corner of West Shore Boulevard and Sunrise Avenue is where there was an old insul brick building that had been, I think, built in the 40s. It was an old insul, most of you don't know what insul brick is, but this was a building that was a little sketchy with regard to its construction. You could go to the back wall of that building and with your hand move the wall. I'm not talking about just the drywall. You could move the wall. We would be in singing, and it had hanging lights, and if the breeze was strong, the lights would move. I reflect back upon those days, and a little bit later on I'll tell you why I'm encouraged to be here today. Not everybody is encouraged. And even pastors have to admit that they're a little bit discouraged these days. I was with Pastor David and a number of other pastors of our association on Wednesday, and we just talked about that. Some of the challenges that are happening as a result of COVID, and how it's impacting the life of the church, and the tensions and the pressures that it's creating. Some of those pastors were willing to admit that they've been a little discouraged. It was a little bit of a surprise then when I got a call on Friday from Pastor David, and he said, Jack, would you preach for me on Sunday? I said, I'd be happy to do that, and he told me the circumstances. People are discouraged. And so I thought I'd look at a psalm this morning that is written by someone who starts out pretty discouraged. Psalm 77. If you have the title at the top of your psalm, you'll see that it was written to the choir master, according to Jeduthun, a psalm of Asaph. You say, well, what's all that about? Well, the titles of psalms are not inspired, but the people who put the psalms together in the different books of psalms did put titles at the top, because sometimes those titles will give us a little bit of an insight into the circumstances under which the psalm was written. Most of the psalms are written by David, and they're usually identified. There's at least 11, maybe more, that are written by Asaph. Who is this guy? And who is the other guy? Well, they were music ministers in the church. Music ministers in the temple. So, David, if music ministers get discouraged, maybe it's commonplace. And quite frankly, I am finding it commonplace. People are discouraged, disappointed. We had a wedding yesterday at our church. It was an outdoor wedding. Wasn't originally planned that way. And a certain number of people, and all the things were all set up. And then 8 o'clock yesterday morning, the premier makes an announcement that affects that wedding. I was to do 7 weddings this summer. 2 of them actually happened. And they were changed greatly. One in the back yard of a cottage. Disappointments, lots of disappointments. And so as a result, people generally are discouraged. Now, let me say that here in Canada and the Western world, we're a little entitled. We think we really should have it better. Maybe we should take a little look at the news, take a little consideration around the world, places like India, Somalia, the Lower Sudan, before we get too discouraged, and maybe think a little bit about people in other parts of the world. Nevertheless, that doesn't change the fact that we get discouraged. I'm not talking about a clinical depression here. If there is that level of discouragement and depression, then you need to address that. I'm just talking about a little lowering of our spirits, as this psalm talks about. I'm talking about having the blues, just not having enthusiasm about life, just being a little discouraged along the way. Asaph sends this psalm, a poem that he has written, to another music minister in the temple. And I think what he might have been doing, we don't know. I think what he might have been doing is saying, listen, can you put this poem to music? You better make it a bit of a dirge, because you'll see in the early part of the psalm, the early part of this poem, that I'm pretty discouraged. How does discouragement show up? Here in verse 1 through verse 1 and 2. I cried aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble I seek the Lord. In the night my hand is stretched out. Without wearying, my soul refuses to be comforted. Asaph is saying, I'm so discouraged. What usually works and what should work, prayer, is not working. It's like the heavens are brass. My prayers are bouncing off heaven. And so what I'm going to do, not only am I going to cry aloud to the Lord, I'm going to cry aloud again, and a little bit louder. Maybe if I cry louder, God will hear me. Very discouraged. He says, my soul refuses to be comforted. If you're discouraged, you better check your attitude a bit. It may be that a learning experience could come. It may be that you have got a critical spirit that allows for discouragement to be promoted and advanced very quickly. Maybe you're like the old guy, like in the old days, old man. He buys a white belt and goes to Florida, pulls his pants up over his stomach, and he's going to complain about the government. That's his life. Don't have a critical spirit. Matter of fact, as we grow older, it would be better for us to grow better than bitter. But he's bitter. He's discouraged. He's saying, my soul refuses to be comforted. So in the area of discouragement, sometimes our own will and our own decision-making process determines whether or not we will be encouraged. Maybe we just want to enjoy poor health. Maybe we want to just enjoy the problems and difficulties that are around us in this world. What's the way to deal with discouragement? Well, it's prayer and meditation. But the difficulty is that sometimes there is such a thing as defective meditation. It's the wrong kind. And that's the kind of meditation that Asaph has in the first part of this psalm. Notice what he says here in verses 3 to 6. Matter of fact, I would encourage you, if you don't have a pen right now, this afternoon, to read over Psalm 77 again and circle, as I have here in my Bible, all the times that Asaph says, I, me, or my. Let me read 3 to 6. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit fails. You hold my eyelids open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old, the years long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart, and my spirit made a diligent search. There's wrong meditation that focuses primarily on the problems and me. It's nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody seems to care. That's the focus that Asaph has in this psalm. He's talking about all his particular problems, focusing on himself. Notice in verse 4, I can't sleep or speak. Not only I can't sleep, but God, it's your fault. You're the one that should be giving me rest. You're the one that should be giving me the ability to be happy and speak about the goodness of God. I can't do it because you aren't doing what I am doing. I called out to you and you didn't hear me. No, God heard. But why he was discouraged is because he says, I called out to you, God, and you didn't do what I wanted to do. You didn't give me what I thought I needed. Wrong kind of meditation. He says, God, you're to blame. He's into nostalgia here in verse 4. He talks about the good old days. Well, if you've lived long enough, you probably have to remember that the good old days weren't. I was talking with my grandchildren just a little while ago and talking about the home in which I grew up. Now, I had a very happy childhood. I reflect back upon that and give thanks to God for it. But we talked about the house I grew up in. We didn't have a bathtub. My granddaughter said, oh, you just had a shower? I said, no, we didn't have a shower and we didn't have a bathtub. So the Saturday night routine was for the three of us kids to get one by one, you like to be first in this case, into a square GWS wash tub for our Saturday night bath. And if you remember GSW wash tubs, you're old. That's how we had our Saturday night bath. The good old days. Good old days weren't. There's a lot of things about the good old days that we're glad got changed. I am quite pleased to have indoor plumbing. I'm quite excited about the idea of central heating and air conditioning, especially the air conditioning over this past summer. See, when we go to a nostalgia trip, the good old days. What the danger is we think just about the good old days and the good feelings that we have, and we compare them to the bad feelings that we're having now. And so we're discouraged. That's what Asaph is doing. He's talking about the good old days. The good old days weren't. Notice what it says here also in verse 6 and 7 particularly. Let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate on my heart, and then my spirit will make diligence. I will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? It's self-centered. It's all about me, all about my problems. If you're discouraged, you need to be looking somewhere else for answers. You won't find them within. And a self-centered, desiring person is going to have difficulties in these days when there's not a lot of encouragements in the circumstances around. The answer is not a change of circumstances. The answer is a change within. See, the difficulty with defective meditation is that it leads to defective theology. Notice what he says here in the next few verses, beginning at verse 7. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at the end of all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? And has he in anger shut up his compassion? The danger with wrong meditation, defective meditation, focusing upon ourselves, is that it leads to wrong theology. He's asking the question here in verse 7. Will God spurn? Wait a minute. I think there's a verse in the Bible that says that God will never leave us or forsake us. How come when I'm discouraged and I'm doing wrong meditation, I forget the promise of God? God won't spurn us. He's promised never to leave us nor forsake us. Verse 8, what about a steadfast love? Steadfast. That's interesting because the word steadfast here in the original is the word hesed. It means unfailing love. It means covenant love. The covenant that God makes with us that is eternal. Wait a minute. Has God forgotten about his hesed, steadfast love? No, he hasn't. But I have not applied that to the situation in which I am because I'm so focused on my own feelings and my own desires. Will God forget his promises? No, God can't forget his promises. He's eternal. He's omniscient. He knows everything. He can remember everything. And because he's eternal, he never changes. See, one of the difficulties for me is I'm getting older, and I forget things. I remember one of my practices when I was actively involved in pastoral work was on Monday mornings, the first thing I would do would be go into my office, and I would write down as clearly as I could remember all the conversations that I had in the church foyer the day before. I'd try to remember what I had said, what I had promised people, where I would be, what I would do. I had to write it down. That's only got worse. Now, I don't remember the promises sometimes that I've made to people. God never forgets. And another a problem of getting older, is that even if I do make a promise to somebody, I can't control my ability to fulfill it. I'm talking to John Baker on the way in about playing hockey, and I still enjoy playing hockey. But I can't promise the guys that when I go on the ice that I'm able to do what I used to be able to do. There's just certain things about growing older. God never grows old. He's eternal. He does not change. So the promises that he makes, he never forgets. The promises that he makes, he can always fulfill. Notice what it says here. Is God not going to be gracious or compassionate or slow to anger? It's Asaph, the music minister in the church, that's writing this. Does he not remember? Probably Asaph sang the solo for Psalm 145. Or it may have been that he had certainly led the choir, and the choir sang Psalm 145, verse 8, "The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love." See, the difficulty with wrong meditation, self-centeredness, is it leads to wrong theology. And we forget the promises of God. We forget what God has said in his word. It's interesting, in the next few verses, you see a complete switch. The same words appear of meditation, words like remember, meditate, ponder, think through. All of those words appear in the next few verses, but the focus shifts. Where before it was, nobody knows the trouble I've seen and nobody seems to care. Now the focus has shifted to that black spiritual. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody but my Jesus. And he begins to focus upon God. And as a result, things change. Notice what it says here. This time, if you're going to do some circling, circle a number of times that the focus is upon God. Verse 10. Then I said, I will appeal to this, the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your wonders of old. I will ponder on your works and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? Same process, sitting there meditating, thinking through the situations of life, but not focusing upon the problems, focusing upon God. Charles Stanley tells an interesting experience. In his early days as a pastor, he was called to First Baptist Church in Atlanta, and not everybody was happy about him being there. Matter of fact, there was a number of people that decided that they, even though he had been called by the church, they were going to put him out, and made it very difficult for him. He said one day, he said he got a phone call from an elderly widow in the church, and she said, Pastor, could you come and see me? And so he did. And she welcomed him and said, I've got something to show you. I want you to take a look at a picture. And it was a familiar picture, and you may have seen the picture. It was the picture of Daniel in the lion's den. And there's a picture of Daniel there kind of sitting on a stone. There's a light that's coming in from some opening in the den or the cave where he is. And so she says, what do you see? And Pastor Stanley goes on, talks about what he sees, and she, you don't see it. Try again. Tries again. He doesn't see it. So finally she says, You don't see it, do you? He says, no. She says, look at Daniel. What's he looking at? He's looking up to the Lord. He's not looking at the lions. That's exactly what Asaph is doing here. It's all turned around in verse 10 of this psalm. This is, by the way, a psalm of lament. There are a number of psalms in the Bible that are psalms of lament. And usually the structure of a song of lament is that people start out good and then get disoriented, and by the end of the psalm they get reoriented. Well, Asaph didn't start out in a very good position, but he did start to get reoriented, and the whole thing swings around at verse 10, where he begins to focus on the Most High. And he begins to think about God and the works of God, and things change greatly. Yesterday, for me, could have been a discouraging day. There were a couple of things that happened that are COVID related, and there were just discouragements. So last evening, I took a bike ride and went for a bike ride around our neighborhood and reflected upon, meditated upon the goodness of God. In case you don't know, I live just south of this building, and so I went around our neighborhood. First place I stopped was the old location of Bayfair Baptist Church. For you that maybe don't know the history of this church, Bayfair Baptist is a result of an amalgamation of two very small congregations that came together. I came in 1969 to one of those churches on the east side of Frenchman's Bay called Bay Ridges Baptist Church. It was an independent Baptist church, not part of the fellowship. On the other side of the bay was Defective Baptist Church. And as I reflect upon it, I think probably that there are only two people in this congregation, still part of this congregation, that were there on that Sunday that I mentioned earlier. Frank Blackstone and Lena Cummings Baker are probably the only two that I think are probably left in this congregation that were there. So I took a ride, and actually I stopped and stepped on the little sidewalk. It's a parkland now, and only a couple of houses that are left still in that large plot of land that's Rotary Park. And so I stepped, and the cement that I stood on was the sidewalk that went in, and I reflected upon the first time that I ever visited on that property. It was 1969, and I walked up that sidewalk because Frank Blackstone's father-in-law, Miles Cook, who was in his late 70s or maybe early 80s, was cutting the grass. And so we sat down on the front steps of, that's the first time I met him, although I knew of him. And we sat down the front steps of the church. And there had been some tension between the two churches. And we talked a little bit about the possibility of those two churches coming together. And I remember what I said. I said, I was like 25 years of age at the time. I didn't know anything. I said, you know, Mr. Cook, if somehow we could blend the wisdom of your experience and the enthusiasm of my youth, we might be able to make this happen. They had 3 deacons, we had 3 deacons. We came together and ultimately we formed Bayfair Baptist Church. The name Dunfair was a combination of 2 things, Dunbarton and Fairport, that formed Dunfair Baptist Church. Then we brought Bay Ridges into it, and it became Bayfair Baptist Church, using parts. So if you ever want to know how Bayfair name came, that's its roots. Actually, Frank Blackstone's wife, Audrey, was the one that suggested that name. So I stopped and just reflected upon God's goodness. I continued to, my bike ride around the neighborhood actually went down past where Frank Blackstone lives, and just thought about a prayer for him as I drove by. Went down to the place where Lena Cummings raised her family, thinking about various families that were in the congregation. Drove by one home where there was members of the congregation were, and thought about the fact that they invited their neighbors, their next-door neighbors. Difficult situation. They were not believers, obviously, and living together. She had 2 boys by another relationship, and then they had 1 boy and the relationship of the 2 of them. And I reflected upon the goodness of God in bringing them into a relationship with Jesus Christ. The privilege of seeing them married and involved in our church. Funny occasion, at a prayer meeting one night, we were looking for a building. The church had grown significantly. The 2 congregations came together. The first time I preached at Bayfair, at Westney, there was 5 adults and 4 children. We brought them together. There was probably maybe 20 adults in both churches in the early days, and so. But the church grew, and we used the portable building that we had brought over from the other side, and that old Dunfair building, which we could push the walls up. But soon we had to move to Frenchman's Bay Public School in order for the congregation to be accommodated. We were in prayer meeting one night, and this man who had recently come to know the Lord we were just praying for finances and an ability to buy the property. And this man said that he's buying lottery tickets in order to hope that he'll get money to build a new building. Mrs. Cook, a pretty straight-laced lady, went up and down his spine about the evils of gambling. Bill tells me at Mrs. Cook's funeral, a number of years later, that from that night on, he bought 3 lottery tickets. 1 for himself, 1 for Mrs. Cook, and 1 for me. Unfortunately or fortunately, we never had to deal with the consequences of winning the lottery. But again, I reflected upon those memories. I reflected upon Mr. Cook. We were in an evening service in the old building. We would have a morning service at Frenchman's Bay, then we'd go back to the evening service in the old Dunfair building. And Mr. Cook keeled over with a heart attack. The doctors say he may have clinically been dead, but 2 nurses, Corrine Hiltz and Kathleen Owens, rushed to revive him. Interestingly, It was Miles Cook that had the connection a couple of years later with the owner of this property. And it was as a result of that we were able to get this piece of property. I'm not sure what it's worth now. It would be in the millions. But in those days, and at that time, we got it for $75,000, $25,000 for each acre. There's 5 acres of land around here. So I was just reflecting upon the goodness of God. I was doing what Asaph was doing. And then Asaph goes to the big encouragement that Jewish people are still celebrating, the Passover and the Exodus. So this afternoon, take some time to read through these verses that talk about, like verse 15, you with your arm redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph. Verse 16, when the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. Remember, this is poetic. This is a poem. He's using poetic license, and so he gives personality to the sea. He said, look at what happened. The children of Israel came out of Egypt, and there they were marching towards the sea. And Asaph says, the sea was afraid of them. So it opened up. Don't be afraid of the sea. Don't be afraid of deep waters. If God is leading, if God's in control, the sea is afraid of God. COVID is not the conqueror. COVID is afraid of God. God's in control. He'll lead us. He'll direct us. Notice what it says here down in verse 18. Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen or unknown. God sometimes leads us through difficulties. Sometimes it's through the sea. Sometimes it's through pretty deep waters. We don't always see God's footprints. But just because we don't see God's footprints does not mean that He is not there. He is there. And we need to trust Him. By faith, bow before Him and accept His plan and purpose for our life. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Here's the way God works. He could have got the children of Israel out of Egypt like that. But instead, He chooses to use human instrumentality. The hand of God is seen in this psalm, but He also uses the hands of Aaron and Moses. That's the way God chooses to work most of the time. So we need to be praying for our pastors, our leaders, the leadership of this church, and the leadership of the churches in Canada. God is choosing to work through human instrumentality. It's not only the leadership. You may be the answer to someone's prayer. God chooses to work through human instrumentality. There may be someone that needs a phone call this week. Maybe there's someone that has a particular need that you could respond to, and you could do what God allows you to do to be of help. So don't be focused upon yourself. Don't be focused upon the problems. thinking a little bit about others. Perhaps you are the answer to someone's prayer, and could be this week. The big deliverance for the Jewish people was the Exodus, getting out of slavery. But do you notice the word that Asaph uses here in verse 16? With your arm you redeemed your people. The biggest deliverance is the deliverance that Jesus Christ provided for us. That redeemed, the word redeemed means to buy off the slave market. That redeemed us off the slave market of sin by his death upon the cross, where he paid the penalty for your sin and mine. So, in the midst of discouragement, which comes to all of us, let's focus on God rather than ourselves. And thinking about the great deliverance that has come for us, that is eternal, provided through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ upon the cross, then let us decide today to follow Jesus and do whatever he wants us to do. Whatever he asks us to do. Even though it's deep waters, even though it's through the sea, and we necessarily are not sure of God's footprints, God is calling us today to be followers of Jesus Christ. I have decided to follow Jesus.